Hey guys, so this is part 3 of the frame rail removal and installment. So today I'm going to be pulling the frame rail assemblies off the car here, getting them ready to be put back on. I got to get the floor supports to the correct height based off of the laser level and the baseline measurements of the car. And then I'm going to set the frame rail assemblies into the floor supports and then just get them clamped on the jig until I get some time to take some measurements off my buddy's fastback just to ensure that everything's in the right place. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, so I just set the laser level of the car right here. It's gonna be kind of hard to see the marks because these guys are blocking it, but there's a mark right here. So if I set the laser level to that, it's good on the rest of the car as per the baseline measurements. So as you can see, I've got scissor jacks underneath the floor supports to get them at the right height, which gets the trans cross member at the right height as well, and the floor. So kind of knocks a bunch of things out. So how I did that is, if you remember on my sheet here, I got this measurement on SolidWorks, and that's the bottom of the floor support. So what I did is I measured out 5 inches, 5.736 inches, and I used my sliding caliper here, and then I marked the line on it. So I just butt that up against the bottom of the floor support, and with my digital level here, I can make sure that it's straight up and down. I'll give you a shot of that as best I can. So I butt it up against the floor support, and then I make sure it's level as best I can. And then I take a look at the line and I raise it up and down with the scissor jacks, and that line is right on the measurement. And it's the same on both sides. So that's how I set the floor supports to the correct height. And now I'm going to go and start setting these guys in. But I got to put the legs on for the jig. They're sitting in there, so they'll attach down in here. And just one last thing, I wanted to make sure that both floor supports were equal with each other as far as height. And I did from underneath in the laser level, so it should have been, and then I put a level on top, and we're right dead in the center. So they are equal. So I wanted to show you that. All right, I got one of the assemblies in, be the passenger side. So, it's still not exactly where it needs to be. I just wanted to show you what it looked like. Some quick notes. Again, it's not where it's supposed to be. I think it's a little far forward right now. But down here, you can see the laser level, or laser line, and it's about 1/4 inch above where it's supposed to be, indicating that the frame assembly in the front sitting low. And it's pretty similar in the back, so I got to move it around and make sure that it's where it's supposed to be. And then I'll get the other one on, and then I'll put the original cross member, the brace that goes between the two, and then my jig assembly to help kind of lock this thing into place. And then we'll go from there. So the trans cross member should be at the correct height right now, but again, I'm gonna have to take some other measurements here and there just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. So makes it a little bit easier to work on just one at a time instead of just placing them both in. Okay, so I got the driver's side hung as well. I took the time to go ahead and set them to the correct height per the baseline measurements off the Ford service manual to my laser level. So come down here, you can see they're dead on. That post, this post, and then the 2 back ones. So it's the height is set correctly. And then, doing this to make sure the front's square, as well as when I hang the fenders, the fender door gap is correct. So, however, this is more in depth than one would think. You really have got to get these things centered to the car. So I got to come up with a center measurement for my laser level to shoot off of, which shouldn't be difficult. And then the distance between these two rails is 27.5. So I'll just divide that by 2 and then measure off each rail at 2 spots, one in the front and one in the back. And then that should center to the car, and that'll be good to go. And then other than that, you can see I got the export brace in place, just helping steady things. And it also does help line things up. However, even with that on, I'm at 27 inches between the two rails. So it doesn't do everything, but it does help. And then I'll get the lower brace on as well, the cross member. And then other than that, and then so the floor supports. So the height measurement that I used initially to set it up was good. However, when I set the frame rails to the correct height per the baseline measurements, they were sitting just maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch, more like an 1/8 inch above the floor supports. So, you know, these things weren't built perfectly, and I'm pretty close, so I'll just lift them up. As long as it's equal on both sides, I don't imagine I'm gonna have too many issues with the floor or the transmission. So, and one thing I also did is, instead of taking the measurement from the front of the floor support, I did it back where the cross member for the trans is, and it was even closer to the measure I'm supposed to have. So that's good news. So it's going to continue on and get the front of the car where it's supposed to be. Okay, so I took the night and I was thinking about how I'm going to center these to the car, and came up with a pretty, what I feel is a decent idea to help get a laser line casting right at the center of the car. So as you can see, I took some blue tape and measured down from this point, from here, pulled to this point, and made sure it was equal distance on both sides. And then I pulled a measurement in between the two, and it was 54.5 inches. And then I divided that by 2 and got 27.25. And then I marked my line. And then I put these alligator clips to help angle the tape down, so it's a little bit easier to see on the laser level. And then same thing up here. I measured down. I stuck the tape right down in here, and it butted up against that, 2.5 inches, and then marked. Did the same thing on the other side, and then pulled a measurement and got 48 5/8, and then that's 24 5/16 to the center. And same deal right here. So then, got my laser level, casting its vertical line, and as you can see, at least hopefully you can, it's dead center. The top of the mark is where my mark was, so dead center in that mark, and then dead center, it's right at the bottom, there's a little nick, and that's where the measurement is. And then when you do the measuring, you want to measure one side to the center and then measure the other side of the center to make sure it's good to go. And you have to interpolate between the two just a hair to make sure you're dead center. Go ahead and do that, and then you should be good to go. And then, so for repeat, if I ever have to set this up again, I don't have to do the blue tape. I marked on the hood, or excuse me, the roof of the car. There's a little mark there. And then down below, same thing right here. And then on each of the I guess the cross pieces for the jig. And then on the trans cross member, you can't see, it's a little dark, but I had made a center line mark on that for when I did this before, and it lined right up with it. So a bunch of spots are saying it's centered. I trust it. Make sure when you do this, you want to get different heights, but definitely different distances in relation to the car to help center the laser level to the car. So now I can take my tape measure and take 27.5 inches, divide that by 2, and then that should get the front of these centered. The back's already reading 27.5, so that'll get the front of these centered to the center of the car. When I say these, I mean the frame rails. And then I should be able to lock it down with some other measurements. I gotta make sure the depth is good, so I gotta get the tram gauge out and do that. I might wait till I have a second person. And yeah, so that's where I'm at right now. All right, so with measuring, I wanted to show you guys how far these are off. So at the very front of the passenger frame rail, I measure them out. 27.5 divided by 2 is 13 3/4. So looking on the tape here, I am just shy of 13 5/8. So if we call it 13 5/8, then I'm an 1/8 inch off. I need to move this frame rail that way, 1/8 of an inch, to get it centered to the car. And we flip the tape over, again on the driver's side, same deal. Looks like I'm just shy of 13 1/2. So this frame rail, the driver frame rail, needs to move this way almost 1/4 of an inch. So that's how I'm going to center them. And then looking at the back, it's sitting in its pocket back here, trying not to block the line. I am off on this one just a hair, by roughly a 1/16 that it could go that way. And then again on here on the driver's side, looks like I'm just a little bit beyond 13. Actually, you know, when I level this out, I'm actually right at 13 3/4. So this one's good. The driver's good where it's sitting back here as far as that measurement's concerned. So that's how I'm going to center these guys. All right, so I'm making headway. Ended up having to redo the laser level of the car. I bumped it, but it was no big deal because I needed to set it to the base measurement again anyway to make sure I had the height of the frame post good. And then I had to take this frame post off because it was interfering. It was too long and it was interfering and wouldn't allow the frame rail to move inboard so I can get that 13 3/4 measurement. So I just used my Harbor Freight Portaband. It's attached to a Swag Off-Road, like a stand for it, and a pretty decent setup, especially for an at-home shop. And then, so I made sure the casting line for vertical casting line at laser level was centered to the car, and then pulling my tape on here, I set it here, and then I took my torpedo level, set it on top, and made sure that the tape was level. And as you can see, right on 13 3/4. And the other one, the driver's side's the same. Then I also put my digital level on the frame rail itself to make sure that it was level vertically. And then as far as which one's good to go, the driver's side's pretty much set, both front and back measurements to 13 3/4. The front's good on the passenger side. The back is just off by 1/16. That's no big deal. I should be able to fix that. And then I need to get the depth of the frame rail in where it sits within the floor support correct. I could tell you they're not right now. I haven't done that measurement yet. And you could just tell by looking at where the engine mount's attached to and the lower control arms. Very so slightly, the driver's side is sitting more back in its pocket than the passenger side. So I'm gonna have to redo all these measurements anyway. However, they've got me pretty much in the ballpark area, so it shouldn't be too hard to do. And then obviously I'll take measurements off my buddy's fastback. So I gotta wait for him to get here to help me with the tram gauge to get these set correctly and square. And then I should be able to weld this to the jig here shortly. Before I do that, obviously I'm gonna hang the fenders back on it and make sure the gap's correct. And then if I need to adjust at all, I will. And so yeah, that's where I'm at. All right, so I got the frame rails in their general location pretty accurately, but I am running into an issue. And I think this issue came about from when I originally welded in the new frame rails. I think, I'm pretty positive that one of them, I think it's the passenger side, wasn't sitting all the way back in its pocket up against the firewall. Now the firewall, the old one, the original one that came with the car, was really bad. Like you could push on it and actually see the metal move. So that may have played a factor in this, but it's going to be probably kind of hard to see. But where the engine mounts and the control arm mounts, the original control arms, if you look down the center line of it and then into the other one, the driver's side is forward roughly 1/4 inch. So for me, those should be exactly the same in their location. So I think what I decided to do is to go ahead and just disassemble the frame rail assemblies. Shouldn't be too hard to get it back to where they were. I'll mark them up and measure for insurance purposes. And then I'll set the frame rails where they need to be, and then get them clamped down to the jig or tack welded in place. That'll help support them, and then I will put each assembly back on and clamp them on, and then add the fenders, and then adjust the fenders to where they need to be, and then I will tack the frame rail, or excuse me, not the frame rail assemblies, but the actual fender aprons back where they're supposed to be, and then follow up with replacing the fender aprons after I get the firewall back in place. So that's the plan going forward. And then just update for SolidWorks. And again, once I'm all done with this, I'm gonna post this image on vintagemustang.com on their forums. But so the measurement from the Liskey diagram, the 66.375 inches from the floor support to the opposite side, rearmost center edge of the elongated hole in the frame rail. So that's kind of hard to do by yourself. And then, I originally had gotten 59.291. So for on the same side from the floor support hole to the same side elongated hole in the frame rail. So hopped on SolidWorks and I used my tram gauge and got the measurement from that edge of that hole to the cross member bolt hole. And then I did the math and I placed it in here. I mirrored it across. And then I did the dimension feature in the software and got 36.933, roughly 36 and 15/16 inches. And it just makes it so much easier to get these frame rails where they're supposed to be without needing another person. So tram gauges be kind of finicky if you're going long distances to do it by yourself. So anyway, just an update on that. And I'm gonna go ahead and get these frame rail assemblies apart. And there you have it. They've been removed from their assemblies. I used plasma gouging for everything. It worked real well. Then a little bit of the air hammer to break off some metal. Again, I want to comment on, when I welded these on originally, the polarity was wrong on the welder. Some of these, when I was even plasma gouging, some of the welds just flew off. There was no fusion to the frame rail from when I welded through the fender apron to it. So I'm glad I'm doing this. Anyway, there they are separated. So my plan is to clean them up on the back side, get rid of some slag, and then that's it, because a lot of the metal on here is getting replaced anyway. And then that way it makes it a little bit easier to fit back on the frame rail to get these fenders at the correct height. So that's where I'm at right now. All right, and both frame rails are on. They're on the frame jig at least. So real quick, show you where I'm at. So remember in SolidWorks, I got these measurements. It's 36 and 15/16, what that rounds up closely to, from the floor support hole to the original cross member hole that attaches to the frame rails behind the suspension components. And it just made it a little bit easier to do it by myself when trying to use a tram gauge. And then I still need to do this cross measurement, but I'm pretty sure I'm dead on. So yeah, I'll show you where I'm at with that. So I used, get this on the floor so you can see it. This is my tram gauge. And I made these little caps for it, and they kind of center the gauge within holes, which is perfect for my application. So in order to get the depth of the frame rail into the pockets of the floor supports, originally I set them in there, I got them where I thought they would be, and then I pulled them in and out according to what the depth needed to be with the tram gauge, based off of the two holes. So the first one, you just see it right there. That's where the the cross member bolts to. And then that hole right there, kind of hard to see. The tram gauge goes right up in it and centers. It's part of the floor support, right? So that's why it was so important to place those in the correct spot. So I'll show you how I did this. Okay, so that's in the floor support. You can see it goes right into that hole perfectly. No bending, no fuss, goes right into it. Same on both sides. So that's how I got the depth correct. Okay, so after I did that, I needed to set the distance off center from the car. So my laser level's casting 2 sets of lines, vertical and horizontal. So once I got it set where it needed to be, and then I went in, instead of doing this off the center, I went and did the height of the frame rail itself first. And as you can see, right here, here's a line. And I'll cover up, see, there you go. And as you see, as I take my hand away, it goes over it perfectly. And it does that on all 4 of the posts for both sides. There's 2 posts per frame rail. So it's set their height equally on both sides. And then I centered the laser level to the car. So here's a mark in case I bumped into it a couple times and had to reset it, so this just helps. So it's centered there, and then I did a distance. Instead of just equally in distance, I wanted to see if it was at an angle. So I centered it up here as well. It's right on the money. And then, to get the rails centered to that line, I just took 27.5 and divided by 2 and got 13.75. And then with 2 hands, I put my torpedo level under it and got the tape level. And as you can see, it's right on 13.75. Then I'll flip it over to the other rail. Same thing. And then when I measure between the 2, I should get $27.5, right on the money. So that's how I centered it, and then I did the same measurement in the back. Notice that the bottom, between the bottom 2 rails was 27.5 and the top was 27 5/8. That's fine. Where the measurement for me that really counts is when I do the Mustang 2 conversion. That between here and here is 27.5, and it is. So once I got all those measurements done, and then I made sure there was no twist in the rails. They're both at 0. So, to me, that means they're set square, both, I guess in this angle, right, and then like this, and then like this. So, that's good. Now, the other thing is I have to get my force supports to the correct height, and I noticed before that this side was much lower than the other side, so I was scratching my head, and it turned out my setup, I got a 4-jack with a pipe holding up, and then I guess a bottle jack on the other side. And the 4-jack had settled a little bit overnight. So as you can see, just a little gap, and I'll be able to fill that in and pull it up and get it flat so it looks nice. Same on the other side. So that sets the trans cross member to the correct height, and I'll show you that. So this here, you can see it's 5.736 inches from that edge to the line right there. I'll show you. And where it really matters is right at where the flange off the cross member meets the actual frame rail itself. Kind of hard to see, but it's right there. So I'll place it near it, and then I use my level to get it right where it needs to be. So I'm not screwed up with my height. It's right on the line. Same on the other side. So that makes the transmission cross member level and the correct height where it needs to be. So technically, I could tack all this together and then double check my measurements, and I should be good to go before I finish weld to the jig and to the car. Okay, so I put a washer in here, the thickness that I needed, and now this rail is lining up perfectly at 13.75, and this rail is the same as well. And we were getting 27.5 pulled across. And in the middle here, where it really matters, because we're doing the Mustang 2 conversion, it is off by a 1/16, and back here it's off by a 1/16 as well. I'm okay with a 1/16. That gives me a little room to play with the Mustang 2. And you know, they want between 27.5 and 27 5/8, so that works. It's definitely in between. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is test fit the the radiator core support, as well as the firewall. See how those fit, and we'll get into that now. All right. What's up, buddy? All right, so I put on the core support, and it went right on. It was a little tight, which is okay, and it did seem like it was moving the rails out just a hair, but not enough to worry about. It was a nice tight fit. I measured between, I'll show you here along the bottom edge, and it is roughly a 1/16, it looks like, over 27.5. So, was that 27 9/16, I believe? Yeah, and then, according to math, I got the firewall in, and man, I tell you what, redoing all this was completely worth it. It fits way better than it did the last time I did this. So, a couple of things. Grab a light, if it works, there we go. So, and I'll show this to you here in a little bit after I take the firewall back out, but if you look down in here, I mean, it fits up against that nice, just a small gap on this side, but you know that when I clamp it in there, it all fits nice and smooth and even. Same thing on this side, over to the top. But so what I was talking about was I'm going to show you next is these rails, when they're in place between these two, this one is longer in this area than over here. That's because there's a bump out built into the firewall and it meets up. So when you put a straight edge across the two, and I'll show this here in a second, it looks funky, but it's designed that way and it's correct. I did pull some measurements off of the center of the car, which happened to be right here, right? Down to this point here. And it was the same on both sides. So those two rails lengthwise are where they're supposed to be. Okay, so I got them clamped on, or not them, I got the firewall clamped on. The other good thing is before I took this out of the car after the first time I initially fitted it to see how it fit, make sure it wasn't defective in any way, I put a center mark on it. Now, if I grab my square, try to do this without blocking the laser, you could just see it right there. If I put this up on here and I'm good on the line, it is right on the line there. If I flip it over, it's the same thing. So that tells me that the firewall is centered to the car as well. And that just so happened to happen. I don't think it's anything I did, it's just how it laid in there. And clamped in, it's right. So to me, the car is, or all the work I've done is good. I need to still wait for my buddy to come over with his fastback so I can get some measurements off of his car, but I'll do that before I finish weld this all to the jig and to the floor supports. And then once that's good to go, the firewall is not going to go in just yet because I still need to do that mod by running that 2-inch square tubing down through there, and I don't want the firewall to be in the way when I do that. So it's just good to know that everything's starting to just fall into place correctly. All right, let me pull this out and show you what I'm talking about with those frame rails. All right, so I'm showing you what I was talking about previously, how this rail, this area right here, it sits deeper into this pocket of the floor support than this one does. So I first noticed it when I was just checking to make sure everything was equal, and I'm not gonna lie, it scared me for a second. But if I set that in there, you can see how I've got it nice and even there. Well, it's not twisted, it's visually equal with the car, but right there, it's completely off. So if I pull it up and get it nice and equal across that edge there, nice and sitting high there. So it tells me that this one is either sitting in shorter or that one's sitting in further, just a hair. And then put them on each other, you can kind of tell that the right side of the level is sitting lower than the left side. So what I did, I was like, okay, what's going on here? So that's when I pulled a measurement from here. If anybody needs this measurement, let me know, I'll do it again. Actually, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. That way you don't have to ask. So I hooked it on. So when I pull onto the driver's side, I do it like this. So when I pull to the passenger side, I'm doing it like that, right? So put it right on there, centered on there, and I pull. It looks like I'm getting 60 and 5/8. Right? And then I would do the same. I would pull and I'm 60 and 5/8 on the dot. So those are in equally. And then after I did that, I was like, okay, then let me look at the firewall and verify that I'm not going crazy. And that's when I looked at it. This is the driver's side, this is the passenger side. You can see it's bumped out right here, and it's smooth right here. So that got rid of that fear of something being seriously wrong. So those frame rails are where they're supposed to be, in my opinion. I'm just gonna verify with some measurements when I get someone over to help me, and it should be good to go. All right, so that's gonna be it for this part. The next thing I'm going to get into is hanging the frame rail assemblies in their place. I'm going to clamp them in place and then put the actual front fenders back on and see how that door gap reveal is. And hopefully all of this was worth it.